Okay, let's begin. Is this too loud or is this okay? Good, good. This sounds loud in my ear anyway. Okay, well, this is the second week of our 4-week series on the meaning and theology of Eastern Orthodox icons. And today we're going to look at what is an icon. What is an Eastern Orthodox icon as opposed to other kinds of religious art? Okay, so to begin to understand this is I need to go over a little bit of history. Now you remember in your history of civilization, I can just make it a little further away from my mouth. In your history of your Western history, your history of civilization, that you have what was called, they used to call it the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. And what happened after the Roman Empire is it essentially divided between the East and the West. And you've got the essentially the hordes of Germanic tribes coming in, who some of them were converted to Christianity and many of them weren't. And you have kind of a collapsing in the west of the Roman Empire. And it kind of moved into feudalism and eventually into nation states in Western Europe. But in the East, where essentially the Roman Empire continued in what's now Istanbul, which was Constantinople at that time, is you have what's called the Byzantine or the Eastern Roman Empire. And from the time of Constantine onwards, that became really the focal point of the remnants of the Roman Empire. And Christianity was very, very strong there. You have a patriarch in the East, in Constantinople, who's fully on a par, certainly at that time, with the Pope in Rome. So you have essentially two patriarchs. You have in the West, the Roman patriarch and the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and in the East you have in Constantinople, the patriarch of the Eastern Church. So they kind of they grew up in some ways by about 5th, 6th century, 7th century in isolation from each other. So in the East there arose in the deserts of Arabia Islam as a new religious movement. But it was also a political movement because Islam also came with an empire of I remember the first caliph is, but anyways, the Islamic empire was an empire of conquest and a religious faith tradition that went with it. Now Islam was strongly influenced in its creation both by Christianity and Judaism, and is and was thoroughly monotheistic, one God. And they took the Old Testament, what we think of as the Old Testament, and the writings of Muhammad in regard to making no graven image. In the 10 Commandment, which commandment is that? The second or third? Thou shalt make no graven image. Joe, which number is that? Third. Thank you. He's holding up 3. So the third commandment, thou shalt make no graven image. They took to mean no image at all, particularly no religious image, but you still have some branches of Islam today will not accept any photographs. Not many, because that's pretty much thoroughly all over the world, but they took that very, very seriously. And so they saw Christianity as having lots of images as being corrupt. And so that was a strong influence in the East. Also at the same time, the veneration of icons had allowed them to take on a superstitious significance. So what people would do in reverencing icons would sometimes be to treat them as holy objects, out of which one could try to hope to magically, in essence, if you kiss it the right number of times, you treat it the right way, you hope to get a result. That's a kind of superstition. or even treat an image as the thing itself instead of pointing towards the divine. So both in terms of some of the use of religious symbolism at that time and in the strong influence of Islam made some people, a group who called themselves iconoclasts, want to get rid of images. So that became one kind of way of thinking. And a number of emperors in the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Empire, decided to side with that very strong political viewpoint and said, get rid of all the images. And so they destroyed them all over Christendom, and the eastern part of Christendom. But because of that divide, it didn't affect the West at all. So you didn't have that divide in the Western Church until the Reformation. And at the Reformation, the same kind of movement took place in the kind of literalistic viewing of the Old Testament. In the English Reformation, in the time of Cromwell, you had a lot of images. You had a lot of stained glass windows destroyed, a lot of statues in the cathedrals and the churches of England were destroyed at that time. It's the same essential movement in a different time, a different place, a different context. But it's the same religious kind of concern about misuse of imagery. So that was a very significant period in the Eastern Christian churches. So from 726 to 787, and then again from 814 to 842, that those two periods, the emperors of the Byzantine Empire did away with all images. And except for some very kind of far-off monasteries, only very few, I can count them in a couple hands, images from that period survived. Though you do have in, Pat and I were talking about this, in eastern Italy, in Siena and Ravenna, you have some of the same images from that period that did survive, that were strongly influenced from the East, and that part of the Mediterranean kind of continued a correspondence and connection. So that was kind of a natural thing. So we don't have a whole lot of examples of what imagery was before that period. But after that period, we have the restoration of orthodoxy, the restoration of images. And I'd like to read a quote from John of Damascus, who was a theologian during that period, who argued strongly as an iconodule for images being used. He writes, who can make an imitation of the invisible, incorporeal, unsubscribed, formless God? No one. Therefore, to give form to the deity is the height of folly and impiety. And hence it is that in the Old Testament, the use of images was not uncommon and was prescribed. But after God in his bowels of pity became in truth man for our salvation, not as he was seen by Abraham in the semblance of a man, nor as he was seen by the prophets, but in being truly a man, truly human. And after he lived upon the earth and dwelt among men, worked miracles, suffered, was crucified, rose again, and was taken back to heaven. Since all these things actually took place and were seen by men and women, they were written for the remembrance and instruction of us who were not alive at that time, in order that though we saw not, we may still, hearing and believing, obtain the blessing of the Lord. But seeing that not everyone has a knowledge of letters, nor time for reading, the fathers gave their sanction to depicting these events on images, as being acts of great heroism, in order that they should form a concise memorial of them. Often, doubtless, when we have not the Lord's passion in mind and see the image of Christ's crucifixion, his saving passion is brought back to remembrance, and we fall down and worship not the material, but that which is imaged. Just as we do not worship the material of which the Gospels are made, nor the material of the cross, but that which they typify. For wherein does the cross that typifies the Lord differ from the cross that does not do so? It is just the same also in the case of the mother of the Lord. For the honor which we give to her is referred to him who was made of her incarnate. And similarly, also the brave acts of holy men and women stir us up to be brave and to emulate and imitate their valor and to glorify God. For as we said, the honor that is given to the best of fellow servants is a proof of goodwill towards our common lady, and the honor rendered to the image passes over to the prototype. But this is an unwritten tradition, just as is also the worshiping towards the east and the worship of the cross and many other similar things. So, when icons were restored, is seen as the triumph of orthodoxy in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And this is, no surprise, an icon of the triumph of orthodoxy, and a very traditional icon. Let's see, can you see this as a pointer? I don't think you really can. I'll just go over here. So here you have two angels holding up an image of the Virgin Mary. And traditionally, this is an image that was believed to first have been created by Luke, the physician, as a witness to Jesus and of Mary. That it was actually pictured, real picture of what Mary looked like, and imagining her holding the man Jesus as a baby. So anyways, so this is a famous type of icon we'll talk about in our last day, no, next week, when we look at icons of the Virgin Mary. So then you have the Empress Theodosia, I think it is, who was the Empress of the East Empire at the time, the Restoration. So she's a very prominent figure, and some patriarchs here. You have two saints holding together, it looks like, or maybe it's this woman saint holding an icon of Christ, and you have another icon of Christ here, and you have these saints below. So, and of course, saints can now be portrayed as well as portraying Jesus himself. So icons are now allowed to be portrayed, but they had to very also carefully say, how do you honor an icon? You know, how is the right way and how is the wrong way? Because you don't want to engage in idolatry. You don't want to engage in superstition. So, this is my last long quote here. An icon has a liturgical function. It is a means of worship and veneration. Like sacred hymns and music, the icon is used as a means of worshiping God and venerating his saints. As such, it is essentially symbolic, leading the soul from the visible to the invisible, from the material to the spiritual, from the symbol to the prototype or original which it represents. As a very Orthodox Christian knows, that in terms of Eastern Orthodox Christian knows, the first act of the faithful upon entering a church is to take a candle, light it, and put it on a candle stand that is placed next to an icon stand, on which is set the icon representing the sacred person or the saint of the particular church or the feast day of that particular feast day being celebrated. Then he or she bows before the icon, making the sign of the cross, and kisses the icon, saying a brief prayer. This series of acts is called a veneration, or honorable reverence of the icon. It is not, and this is really not an act of worshiping the icon. The Greek church fathers distinguished very sharply between honorable reverence, which is accorded to icons, and worship. Worship is accorded only to God. Further, they emphasize that the veneration which we give to a holy icon goes to the prototype which it represents. For example, to Christ, or to the God-bearer, which is their name for Mary, to some martyr or other saint. Or in the words of Basil the Great, which have been repeated by John Damascene and other defenders of the icons, the honor which is given to the icon passes over to the prototype. That's how in the triumph of orthodoxy they understood the proper use of icons. So from that time, from 836, you have the kind of specific tradition of Eastern Orthodox icons being established and traveling wherever the Eastern Orthodox Church grew to be. And that's in such far-flung places as the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in Ethiopia, to Russia, throughout Asia and throughout Eastern Europe, where the Eastern Orthodox Church primarily triumphed. This is an example of something like an icon. This is a very modern picture. Julian of Norwich is a saint in both in the Episcopal Church and the Church of England, and it's taking the style of an icon. And I wanted to show it because it kind of gives you an example of what an icon does, and in some ways what it doesn't do. An icon is not trying to be as lifelike as this portrait of Julian of Norwich is trying to be, nor will it try to be as cute, picturing a cat. But a cat is actually a very big part of Julian's story. She was what's called an anchorite who lived in solitude, but she lived connected to the cathedral in Norwich. In Norwich, England, and she had like a little window in the cathedral. That's like, like a hole built through a window into the little hut where she lived, into the inside of the cathedral, and she would talk to people who wanted to come to her for counsel. And she was a spiritual director of some renown. So that's representing something about her in the picture, representing a similar kind of halo around her head, and kind of the clothing that you might find in an icon. So it's a similar style, but it's more of a westernized version. So I just want to give you that kind of as an illustration. Of course, there are thousands of saints that are pictured in Eastern Orthodox iconography, and we're going to look at a few of them. Most of them biblical saints, but at least one who isn't. Oh, why the cat? She had a cat with her, probably as a mouser, but the cat would tradition would be on her lap, and she gave counsel. Yeah, she does kind of look like that here. She was the one who is famously quoted, "All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." T.S. Eliot used that in one of his famous poems, and that phrase is of great meaning. Well worth reading if you ever get some of her, a book of her writings. Okay, this is an icon of Paul, the Apostle Paul, and a traditional icon, even though this is a very modern one. You have the English here instead of the Greek writing. But he's holding a book representing his letters, and the face of Paul goes way, way back. And this is how you see the tradition of Eastern Orthodoxy followed in an icon of a saint. Sorry. This is an icon of Paul. You can see it's very much the same face. I don't think I can go back easily. Oh, yes, I can. Okay. So very much the same face, and the same, high forehead and balding head and the same beard. So you have a similar style. And I'll speak a little more about St. Andrei Rublev, who was iconographer in Russia in, I think, the late 15th, early 16th century, or maybe it's late 15th and early, late 14th and early 15th, whatever it is, 1400s to 1500s, is considered the greatest iconographer of all time in many ways. It's beautiful icons. And of course, it's damaged over time, so this whole side is kind of damaged, and you can see, the wood is all kind of cracked in the paint, but so you have a sense of its beauty and luminosity. But this is a medallion, a Roman medallion of St. Paul and St. Peter. And you can see a lot of the same features in the head. This medallion, we don't know exactly how early it goes back, but it goes back before iconography, long before probably the triumph of Orthodoxy. So this is something that existed in the West, and it goes back, maybe sometime after Constantine, representing Paul and Peter. And you've got the same tradition carried up all the way into the 20th or 21st century, when this icon, the other one, of Paul is present. So in the icons, you carry on that tradition. Some things would change. Some things are, a matter of artistic freedom, but many things are set down in a specific tradition. But you also have the story of the saint. So here you have the story of the conversion of St. Paul. And so Paul is with his two traveling companions. He's going to Damascus, represented by these architectural buildings. On his horse, he's knocked off his horse and sees Jesus and hears a voice, or maybe he doesn't see him because he's blinded at that point, saying, Paul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? So you have that image in the story. So an icon will not only show a picture of a saint, but also tell the story about the saint. Sometimes within the icon itself or around its perimeters, sometimes as a separate icon. But there's a lot to that story, so here's a whole other version of it. And because we don't have a set way of telling that story, the story might be told with different pictures. But Paul is basically the same in each, and the essence of the story doesn't change. So you hear again, you have Paul now knocked off his horse. Again, you have Jesus. Here's Damascus. But this one, you have him being led by the hand because he's blind. So the next saint is St. Nicholas of Myra. This is St. Nicholas of jolly old St. Nick, who was a saint, or was a bishop in Myra, modern-day Turkey. I can't remember what would be the closest part of Turkey that it would represent, but and all around are stories from his life, and he's a saint, kind of like St. Patrick, whose day is coming up soon. That lots and lots of stories and legends grew up around, and particularly about his generosity. So I don't know if you can see it here, but here he's holding the hand of a jailer about to strike off the heads of 3 prisoners because Nicholas found out that they were innocent, or believed in their innocence, and stopped their execution and saved them. There's one of him, where is he in a boat? Yeah, there's the ship. So he's appearing on a vision to sailors. And St. Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors. And is known for his generosity and his miracle healing, miracle working. So that's him. And so here's the Virgin Mary in this corner, giving him his vestment that represents his office as bishop, which is worn over the shoulder. And there's Christ giving him a gospel, and which he's holding in his hand. So you have a lot of symbolic meaning in the icon. But you might also have an icon that just pictures Nicholas holding a book. But it also might have the story, because you want people to know the story. So icons tell a tale. And icons also picture, oops, I didn't mean to go there yet. Icons picture the holiness that the saint represents. In the theology of why icons, from that whole period in which they were destroyed, a saint is someone who shows us something of Jesus. So that halo around the saint is the holiness that we want to strive for, the holiness we see in the saint, the holiness that we recognize in them. And that's why you have saints pictured in icons and represented and appreciated, because they represent that kind of life, the divine life that we're called to enter into by virtue of Jesus giving us life. So saints are pictured in icons, and we'll continue with looking at saints, some biblical ones. This is John the Baptist, as you can tell by his head down here. But why in the world is he wearing wings? He didn't fly around in any story that I heard about. But they are symbolic, that his status as a messenger announcing the coming of the Messiah. So this icon, many of the icons of John the Baptist have him with wings. Not all of them. Others have him simply kind of motioning towards Jesus or deferring to Jesus, as he certainly did. He must grow greater and I must grow smaller, as he said in the Gospel of John. He's wearing essentially animal skins. The green vestments or clothes are to represent earthliness. And you see down here at the bottom, this is representing water. He's baptizing in the water. And this is a little tree, and you might be able to see that's an axe. The axe is at the root of the tree. And he preached that in the Gospel of Luke. I think it's pronounced that way. And he's holding a cross. You can see the cross, the staff. And the cross is to represent his status as a martyr. And the scroll, this is a translation of the scroll. Seest thou what suffer those who censure a word of God, the faults of the unclean? Not being able to bear censure, lo, Herod, cut off my head, O Savior. That's what the scroll reads. So it's about his martyrdom. And Jesus is looking on with the cross around his head and his head as a resurrected Lord now within essentially the mandorla. That's John the forerunner, or John the Baptist. And this is Nicodemus. And he's called in the Orthodox Church disciple of night. Remember, we just had his reading this past Sunday. He's also called a myrrh bearer. Do you remember what happens after Jesus is crucified? Yeah, he and Joseph of Arimathea take him. He's buried in Joseph's grave, and they anoint him with myrrh and oils in preparation for burial. So he's called the myrrh bearer. And I guess this is supposed to be somehow myrrh. Often some of the icons of him have kind of a flask of oil representing that burial rite. But again, and this is around the head is representing gold leaf and light coming from him. But we also have an icon of the story. Now we don't know, there's no real tradition of what he looked like. So you have a very different looking person in this icon from the one before. But you still have Nicodemus in the picture. And here is Jerusalem. They have a candle. He's come to Jesus at night, and it's where he tells Jesus, we've heard good things about you, basically, and Jesus says, it talks about you must be born again. That famous dialogue that we had in the gospel reading this past Sunday. So that's representing that story. Another saint who we will celebrate this coming Sunday is the woman at the well. And her name in the Orthodox tradition is Fotini, Saint Fotini. In the Eastern Church, she has a name, which I didn't know until I kind of looked that up some time ago. So she went into the city of Samaria, what was the name of the city? Shekar, I think, and told the people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. And they are curious, and they come out to see Christ. So she was, in a sense, she was the first evangelist. And in many ways, on a par with the apostles, because of her witness to Christ. And a woman who people knew everything she ever did, apparently, because she was talked about, and she had to go out at noon when no one else was out there to draw water. So she had a bit of a reputation, and not a good one. So a convert to Christ, and someone who shined with light. In a lot of legends grew up around the saints. And the legend around Saint Fotini was that she not only told her story to the people in town, but she also told her story to her family. She converted to following Jesus, her sisters and her brothers. And after, years later, that they emigrated to, of all things, Carthage, which is in northern Africa. And there she was martyred. Whether that's true or not, we don't really know, but that's the tradition around her. But anyway, so this is a modern icon of her. I mean, a modern English American version of the icon, but it's certainly in the Eastern Orthodox, fully in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. And this is another image of her telling the story with Jesus at the well. And so, of course, she's got her picture, and there at the well, and there's the town of Sychar, and there they are. So that's the part of the story, the biblical story. Okay, so there's icons of saints. There's icons of Jesus, a variety of icons of Jesus, and a variety of icons of the Virgin Mary, who is, of course, a saint, but a saint of special note in her role as the God-bearer. So in the Roman Catholic Church, they'll sometimes call her the Mother of God, and the Eastern Orthodox Church thinks that's edging a little bit on the side of blasphemy, whereas God has no mother, but as the God-bearer, because he brings to life the Son of God. So that's their word for her, the Theotokos, the God-bearer. So now we have, so icons of saints and of Jesus and Mary, and there are icons that tell stories, that recount biblical stories in particular, or sometimes legends. But these are some of those biblical stories and feast days. So there's icons that represent feast days of the church and tell the symbolic meaning and the life of the spiritual life of what's going on in that festival day. We looked at a few of those last week. The nativity of, the icon of Easter, which we will look at again. The icon of the Ascension, of Trinity. Anyways, we had of Transfiguration we looked at last week. I think we looked at another one too. But so I want us to look at now some icons which are festivals of the church. And the first one is the icon of the Nativity. And there's a lot going on in this image, but it's a very traditional one, the way that the Eastern Orthodox Church almost always tells the story. So you have Mary here, of course, and there's baby in a manger, and there's the ox and ass, and they're in a cave. In the how many of you been to the Holy Land? I know a number of you have been there. Dave, what was the church like that at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem?
Well, spilled over a cave.
Exactly, a cave, and there is Mary in a cave. And a cave also has a deep symbolic kind of representation. It's connected to last week when we looked at the icon of the crucifixion, there was a cave with bones right below the cross where Jesus hung, representing Adam and Eve's bones and death. That in his death he joined all of humanity in their deaths. So the place of the cave is a place kind of beginnings and endings, I guess you could say. So the cave is represented here, and the cave has represented a lot of kind of holy moments in Jesus' life. So you have the cave where he was born. Here are the midwives, and they're holding Jesus and his little cross, his little halo, and they're washing him after his birth. So that's a legend around his birth of the midwives who attended Mary. And here we have coming the shepherds, playing a flute and walking, looking at the angel who are singing, the choirs of angels,
and they're sheep, and they're on the way to see what they've heard, and then we have the wise men on the way. And then here we have another kind of story going on. This is St. Joseph. And he's being tempted by the devil because Joseph doubted Mary's virginity. And, he found out she was pregnant and was going to quietly divorce her. So he wouldn't put her to shame, but he didn't trust where this child was coming from until he had the vision in his sleep, in a dream. So here he's being tempted by that. So all that's going on in the picture. But it's a way of telling the story and illustrating it. So that's what the festival icons do. They tell the story of the feast. This is another one, one I showed last week. This icon represents the Feast of Easter. And it's not telling specifically the story of Easter, it's telling specifically a passage in 2 Peter where Jesus is said to go down to make proclamation to the spirits long imprisoned in death. So here he is with Old Testament saints, King David and Solomon. These are other Old Testament figures, I'm not sure who. And he's raising Adam and Eve out of their graves. He's trampling down the gates of hell. Here are all the chains and locks being broken and falling into the abyss that held people long in prison, because Jesus has risen, trampling down death by death and bringing life to those in the tomb. So what a beautiful illustration for us of what the meaning of the Feast of Easter is. It's about being raised from death to life, having all those chains that hold us down broken. Jesus has broken them down and offering us new life, life abundant. And you don't have to look at that long to just kind of put yourself in the place of either Adam or Eve and feel like you're just being lifted up. This is an icon of the Feast of the Ascension. And in Luke, Jesus ascends, and the disciples are looking up, and the angels say to them, why are you looking up to heaven? Jesus, who you saw disappear, will go up to heaven, will come again the same way at the second coming. So here are the angels. Mary is here pictured here with the disciples, and this particular disciple is raising his hand, looking up, and all the disciples are gazing up to heaven, to what they've seen. Jesus is in the mandorla. Again, the resurrected appearances of Jesus are in a mystery, because he's no longer shown as he is on earth, as he was on earth. He's shown as he is in heaven, on the seat of the right hand of the Father. So where is that? As we talked about maybe last week, it's everywhere. So Jesus is now all places, all times, and he's being carried up in the wings of angels, cherubs and seraphs, carrying him up the throne of heaven. So there's a strong and important theological meaning to the Feast of the Ascension. And this is an interesting icon. This is the icon of the Holy Trinity. And I was telling you a little about St. Andrei Rublev, the great iconographer of the late 1400s and 1500s in Russia. There's a wonderful luminosity about his icons, which is the ideal of how one should paint an icon. When you paint an icon, you start out with dark colors, and you build lighter and lighter. And you want very thin layers of paint. And in a traditional icon, you use egg tempera, which is natural, as opposed to a kind of a plastic subject like acrylics. You want to have layer of very thin paint, and so you have a sense of, as you see here, particularly these raiments, that the blue is shining through the softer and lighter pink and peach colors on the robe here. You have this sense of luminosity and light. So you start with a darker color of the face, and then you have lighter colors, because you want an inner light to show of the holiness of that person, to literally be aglow. So the divine life is being shown both in the person and in the radiance. This is considered an icon of the Trinity because it tells the story of the hospitality of Abraham. Could someone look up in their phone, or if you have a Bible handy, Genesis 18 verses 1 through 15? Bill, you looking it up?
Give it a try.
Good. Genesis 18 verses 1 through 15. If you can read it out loud to us.
Hang on.
No pressure, man.
Okay, you ready? Genesis 18 verses 1 through 15. Yeah.
The three visitors?
Yes.
The Lord appeared to Abraham.
I'll tell you let me read it, because just because I have the microphone and people who are watching online be able to hear. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," he answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 seahs of the finest wheat flour and knead it and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set those before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh." And you know what they named their child? Yeah, Isaac means laughter. Now, this icon tells that story. It has all the details of the story. Abraham going, here's the tree, and Abraham's going and coming, and he's going to Sarah, and he's going to his flock, and he's washing their feet, and there they are, these 3 visitors who represent God by this, at eating. But this is always, for the Orthodox Church, and for Christians pretty much all the time, been seen as symbolic of God is Father, Son, and Spirit. And they're feasting here as representing a foretaste of future symbol of the Eucharistic table, the sacrifice of Christ at the altar. So one of the reasons Andrei Rublev is so revered, in addition to the absolute beauty of his icons, is his recognition of the importance of that, the theology of these three, and telescoping it all in, taking all this stuff out and just picturing the three visitors. And you still have the elements. I mean, you have the table and you have the tree. You have some architectural elements here. But you have this beautiful circle, and you have these three visitors who are symbolically representing God. Now, of course, you can't picture God as Father, and you can't picture the Spirit. You can't see. The wind blows where it will, and we don't know where it comes from and where it goes, as Jesus said to Nicodemus. And yet, the Spirit is present. So God is Father, Son, and Spirit. This is a symbolic view of that. And so you've got this perfect circle, this perfect unity and peace and tranquility between them. It's there at the Eucharistic table. This middle angel is seen as the Christ figure here because he's wearing the same colors that the icons of Christ have of his clothes. And they're solid. They're incarnate. They're in flesh. They're solid. Where the icon is seen as the Father and Spirit, this would be as the Father and this is the Spirit, all on the same plane, are translucent. They're not solid in the same way that one who became flesh is solid. They're not as visible to the eye, not concrete. Both the Father and both Jesus and the Son and the Spirit are bowing towards the Father. The Father is acknowledging the Son. And all are in communion with each other. Same face, yes. Yeah, very much. Yeah. Same face. And it's not male or female. You notice. It's human, but it's not male or female. And this is from the early 1500s or late 1400s in Rome. It's a remarkable picture. As all icons, particularly icons picturing an event, as I mentioned last week, it's an inverse perspective. It's going out because it's picturing heaven. Heaven is bigger than anything on earth. So we see out into heaven. It doesn't have, kind of like looking down a railroad tie and you see an end point, which you do to get perspective in pictures. The perspective is reverse of what you see in Western art or art that's trying to show real life and perspective. This is showing a heavenly perspective, and that's what icons are doing. They're trying to show a heavenly perspective, a divine perspective, and communicating that to us. Also communicating, in the saints that each of us has that possibility of showing the light of Christ. Every human face has the possibility to be the face of Christ to somebody else. But this face, these three together, are just a remarkable and beautiful icon. I'm just going to take some questions, and then we're going to spend a little time with this icon in prayer. So, any questions? Lois?
Okay, so when someone creates an icon like this, how were the people of the time supposed to know what they were creating?
So when someone creates an icon like this, how do the people at the time know what they're creating?
I mean,
This
we
is
look at that, we
yeah.
don't see anything.
Right. Well, this is in the tradition of this. So they already knew that, as they portrayed this event, they were portraying a prototype of the Trinity. They already believed that.
Someone had told them that.
That had
that had developed as a theology of the church in the way that creed had developed. You know, it developed. It was a very specific language of theology in these pictures. So that had already developed, and what Rublev did, and you don't typically in iconography have a major step forward in thinking. You're pretty much just keeping the tradition. But in this case, Rublev took a major step in saying, let's just focus on these three and let that tell the story. Because the story is about God. As we know, God is three in one. So we can really focus on that instead of all the busyness of the rest of the story. So, you know, he did it, and people commented on it, and it became the new tradition. This is how you now picture that story and how you picture the Trinity. Yeah.
Is it symbolic that the Christ is the one closest to the tree, and then also that the tree is bent at the same angle as
I bet you're right, sure.
towards the Father?
I think that's a great view into it, yeah. For those who didn't hear, that the tree seems to be inclined towards Jesus, and Jesus, of course, hung on a tree, and it follows the same kind of symmetry of the painting, and absolutely. He knew what he was doing. Yeah. Yeah.
Where are all of these icons located?
Well, this is in a museum in Moscow now. I don't know, or I think Moscow, or somewhere in Russia. Did you see it? Do you remember seeing this icon? No, okay. When you were there in the 90s?
They're all quite beautiful. They
Yeah.
really are. But your storytelling makes them even more beautiful.
Yeah.
The understanding of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, the understanding definitely makes them more beautiful, and that's why I'm trying to introduce you to them.
Yeah.
But also, you know, if you grew up in that tradition, you would know the story.
Yeah.
You know, if you have, well, we have beautiful stained glass windows in our church, you know, and we probably should spend some time taking everybody around and saying, well, this is what this window is, what it represents, you know, so we know the art around us. Ron.
Yeah, to me it's kind of interesting, and I don't know, the way he does the blues and the browns, because if you look at like the sun, you got the hot solid brown, and the blue, I guess, is the Holy Spirit on the outside, and then if you look at the Spirit, really the blue becomes kind of the essence of what that is on the right.
Kind of the inside.
And then when you look at God type of thing, it kind of permeates between the two.
Yeah, it's just the way Ron's commenting on the colors, for those who couldn't hear him, that Jesus has the blue on the outside of his clothing. The angel representing the Spirit, or traditionally seen as representing the Spirit, has the blue on the inside, and the angel traditionally seen as representing the Father has it kind of like translucent throughout. So yeah, I'm sure there's a symbolism in the color.
You see the thrones.
Yeah, well, they're seated.
Yeah.
Whether they're thrones or not.
The right hand.
Yeah, the right hand of God, sure, yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot there, awful lot there. What?
Also that architecture that we've seen tonight, you know, you say mountains and water, we're like, oh, that's water. The whole flat thing. It's supposed to help you understand this is not just a painting of some place.
Yeah.
You know, like the classical paintings
Yeah.
of Rome or whatever.
So Carol's commenting that architecture and the landscape that's shown is not meant to necessarily kind of say, you know, you're not looking at, oh, what a beautiful landscape. You know, you look at some Renaissance pictures of some famous and beautiful Western religious art, say, of the Nativity, and they show, maybe they're showing a city in the distance and all these things. You know, you're kind of supposed to look at the artist. Wow, what a great artist! And oh, how cool is that? You know, it's that city up there. In icons, it's meant to be part of the story, and it's all symbolic.
Speaking of the landscape, could you show us a couple of the outdoor scenes again? It looks like go back farther.
Yeah, this one.
No, back to the beginning where everybody was outside.
Oh yeah.
Keep going.
The icon of the.
No. I can't tell it. There, that
Paul,
Thank
yeah,
you. The background,
yeah.
if it's in the desert, it looks like it's mountains, but then it looks like it's blocks. I can't tell what the backgrounds
Yeah.
are.
It's basically, it's the desert. Paul was on the way to Damascus, and it's more about what the story is around than it is about anything that's meant to be historically accurate or,
Okay, all right.
yeah. It's about its function in the story. And we're talking about the architecture and landscape. It's about its function in the story, less about than about its beauty, because icons are about the story, and it's about picturing the divine life, the divine different aspects of the divine story.
So
Okay?
it's a style, it's like stylized.
Well, it's not only stylized; it's symbolic.
It's so stuff, it's so.
Yeah, it's symbolic.
So big.
Yeah. Well, we are at near the limits of our time, so I want to read a piece of a wonderful little book. If you have this, is a great book, and it's still available. Because I turned out I'd given my copies away, and I just bought another copy from Amazon for $15. So it's still available. It's called "Behold the Beauty of the Lord: Praying with Icons" by Henry Nouwen. And he takes 4 icons, and we're going to actually look at all 4 of them during our time. Actually, we already looked at the descent of the Spirit last week, which is the Pentecost icon. We're going to look at an icon that's the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Tenderness, and we'll look at, and he also looks at this particular icon as particularly wonderful images to pray with. And this is part of what he writes about this icon. And look at it and try to see what's in that as I read this. And we'll just have a couple moments of silence to be with this symbolic representation of God as Father, Son, and Spirit, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, in this very holy image. Within the circle of the Holy Trinity, all true knowledge descends into the heart. The Russian mystics describe prayer as descending with the mind into the heart and standing there in the presence of God. Prayer takes place where heart speaks to heart. That is, where the heart of God is united with the heart that prays. Thus, knowing God becomes loving God, just as being known by God is being loved by God. From within this holy circle, this house of love, the mystery of God is revealed to us. It is the mystery of the 3 angels who appeared at the oak of Mamre, who ate the meal Sarah and Abraham generously offered to them, and who announced the unexpected birth of Isaac. It is the mystery of hospitality expressed not only in Abraham and Sarah's welcome of the 3 angels, but also in God's welcome of the aged couple into the joy of the covenant through an heir. This angelic appearance is the prefiguration of the divine mission by which God sends us his only Son to sacrifice himself for our sins and gives us new life through the Spirit. The tree of Mamre becomes the tree of life. The house of Abraham becomes the dwelling place of God with us, and the mountain becomes the spiritual heights of prayer and contemplation. The lamb that Abraham offered to the angels becomes the sacrificial lamb chosen by God before the creation of the world, led to be slaughtered on Calvary, and declared worthy to break the 7 seals of the scroll at the end of time. This sacrificial lamb forms the center of the icon. The hands of the Father, Son, and Spirit reveal in different ways its significance. The Son in the center points to it with 2 fingers, thus indicating his mission to become the sacrificial lamb, human as well as divine, through the incarnation. The Father on the left encourages the Son with a blessing gesture, and the Spirit, who holds the same staff of authority as the Father and the Son, signifies by pointing to the rectangular opening in the front of the altar that the divine sacrifice is a sacrifice for the salvation of the world. Thus, praying with the icon leads us into the mystery of God's self-revelation. It's a mystery beyond history, yet made visible through it. It is a divine mystery, yet human too. It is a joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mystery, transcending all human emotions, yet not leaving any human emotion untouched. Let us spend a few moments in prayer. Gracious and loving Lord, who appeared in the form of 3 visitors to Abraham and Sarah with the promise of a new covenant. Thank you for bringing that covenant through Jesus, your Son, to us, of empowering us through your Spirit to that life which brings us true life now, beyond all the falsehoods of supposed life on earth, to a life that is eternal. Thank you that you dwell in that house and invite us to that holy table and to share your life, to share your peace and your eternity. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Next week, we will look at icons of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, the God-bearer.